Have you ever walked into a room and felt like your presence didn't matter? Not because anyone said it, but because the silence swallowed your voice and your smile felt borrowed. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't need physical isolation. It happens even in crowded rooms, even in loving families, even in long marriages. It's the quiet ache of feeling invisible, of living a life that seems to move forward, yet leaves your essence behind. Many of us were not raised to exist. We were raised to please. We were taught to adjust our tone, to shrink our desires, to read the room before we dared to speak. We became experts in seeking cues, looking for that nod, that smile, that signal that it was okay to be ourselves. But what happens when that signal never comes, when the world seems to say, "You're too much" or "You're not enough"? We learn to ask for permission, not openly, not in words, but silently, subtly. We ask for permission to speak our truth, to wear what feels right, to feel deeply, to exist in full color. This is where the soul begins to fracture. When your identity is shaped by the reactions of others, your life becomes a mirror maze. You twist and turn, hoping to find yourself, but every reflection is distorted. You learn to be agreeable, palatable, invisible, and while that keeps the peace on the outside, inside, something begins to die. You start to feel like a ghost in your own story, alive but not truly living, smiling but not truly seen. Somewhere along the way, we confuse love with performance. We begin to believe, if I behave the way they want me to, maybe they'll accept me. If I disappear a little, maybe I'll finally belong. But here is a truth few dare to face. You will never feel truly loved if you are not being truly yourself. When love is earned by silence, by obedience, by pretending, it doesn't reach the soul. It reaches the mask, and the real you. She waits. He waits. In silence, in shadows. There's a grief that grows in pretending. A grief that whispers, "You were born for more than this." And yet, we keep asking for permission to speak, to dream, to breathe fully, to take up space in a world that once told us to stay small. But the truth is, no one can give you that permission. It's not theirs to give. It was never meant to be. You are not here to be tolerated. You are not here to be manageable. You are here to live, wildly, deeply, truthfully. But first you must recognize the cost of your invisibility, because the moment you stop asking for permission is the moment life begins to change. It's not easy. It feels like standing naked in a world that taught you to wear armor, but it's the only path back home, back to you. There is a question that few dare to ask. When did you first learn that your truth was too loud? It doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins in soft moments, long before we have the words to explain them. A raised eyebrow when you were too excited, a cold silence after you cried too long, a distant look when you asked for too much love. As children, we are open fields, raw, pure, unfiltered. But the world doesn't always welcome our wildness, and so we begin to shrink. We learn that being fully ourselves comes with consequences, disapproval, rejection, emotional distance. And in that quiet heartbreak, a seed is planted, the seed of self-denial. Not because we are bad, not because anyone meant harm, but because we needed love more than we needed authenticity. And so we traded. We traded our voice for belonging, our boundaries for safety, our spontaneity for acceptance. The child within us, she didn't disappear. She just learned it was safer to hide. Can you picture her? A little girl, sitting silently at the edge of a noisy dinner table. A little boy holding back tears because boys don't cry. A child who begins to ask, what do they want me to be, instead of, who am I really? That question changes everything. It builds the foundation of a life lived on tiptoes, always cautious, always adjusting, always watching. And with each silent compromise, we drift further from ourselves. This is where the unconscious begins its work. The parts of you that were not welcome, your anger, your sensitivity, your dreams, don't die. They go underground. Into the shadow, they become ghosts that haunt your decisions. They show up as people-pleasing, as anxiety, as the inability to say no, or ask for what you need. They show up in your relationships, in your career, in your silence. Jung taught us that what we reject in ourselves doesn't disappear, it controls us from the dark. That is why so many adults walk through life unsure of who they are, because the child in them was never allowed to simply be. Can you feel her now? The part of you that still waits to be chosen even by you? The part of you that's tired of hiding? This isn't about blame, it's about awareness, because once you see the root, you can stop watering it, and you can begin to grow something else. Self-denial is not a life sentence, but it is a legacy until you choose to break it. The moment you stop asking the world if it's okay to be you, is the moment you begin to unearth the child who never got the chance to live out loud. And she is waiting, with open hands, and a voice that remembers. Who did you become to be loved? It's a haunting question, not because we don't know the answer, but because we do, deep down. We know the version of ourselves we built to survive, to be chosen, to be enough. It starts so early. This subtle construction of a self that is palatable, pleasing, polished. We learn what earns praise and what brings disapproval. We shape our behavior, our voice, even our body language to match what others want. This mask, Jung called the persona, a social costume, crafted not from deceit but from necessity. But over time, something tragic happens. We forget it's a mask. We wear it so well, so often, that we begin to confuse it with our truth. We think, this is who I am. But the soul knows better. The soul remembers what we buried beneath the mask, the anger we never expressed, the dreams we gave up because they were too much, the softness we replaced with strength to be taken seriously. The persona is not inherently bad. It allows us to move through the world, to function, to relate. But when it becomes a prison, when we can no longer take it off, that's when it turns into suffering. Because behind every polished persona is a raw, honest self, waiting for permission to come home. Imagine this, a woman in her 60s, successful, admired, always put together. But inside, she feels hollow, because everything she's built, the image, the accolades, the perfection, was crafted to earn love, not to express truth. Or a man who's been strong his whole life, reliable, stoic, but never once asked, what do I need? Because his mask never allowed him to need. These are not rare stories, they are everywhere, in your friends, in your family, in your mirror. And here lies the paradox. The more you rely on the persona to be accepted, the more invisible your true self becomes. That's why the love we receive while wearing a mask never satisfies. It reaches the exterior but never touches the soul. So what happens when you begin to take the mask off? It feels terrifying, exposing, vulnerable, but also liberating. You begin to feel the difference between admiration and intimacy, between approval and authenticity. You start to hear your own voice again, the one you silenced to keep the peace. You begin to reclaim your too muchness, your quirks, your fire, your essence. And slowly, something sacred happens. People begin to love the real you. Not everyone, but the right ones. And most importantly, you begin to love the real you. Not the performer, not the pleaser, not the projection, but the imperfect, radiant whole being that you always were underneath. Because life doesn't begin when you're finally accepted. It begins when you stop needing to be. Why does rejection cut so deep? Even when it comes from people who never truly saw us. Why do we walk on eggshells, soften our edges, hold back our truth, just to avoid that one haunting possibility, displeasing someone? These are not just personality traits. They are survival patterns, born from moments where authenticity cost us connection. Somewhere in your story, there was a time when being real, being emotional, loud, opinionated, sensitive, led to withdrawal instead of warmth, criticism instead of care, distance instead of closeness. So you adapted. You became careful. You read faces like weather patterns. You learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to apologize before you even made a mistake. Not because you were weak, but because you were wise, wise enough to know what it takes to be kept close. And in that wisdom, something precious was lost. Your right to be whole. The pain of rejection isn't just about being unwanted. It's about what we make it mean. We don't think, they didn't accept my actions. We think, I am not acceptable. Rejection becomes evidence that who we are is wrong, and from that wound a fear is born. A fear so deep it shapes how we love, how we speak, how we exist. We say yes when we mean no. We smile when we want to cry. We give until we're empty, then apologize for not having more to offer. We fear that if we disappoint, we'll be left. That if we take up too much space, we'll be pushed away. That if we dare to say, this is what I need, we'll be told we're selfish, or dramatic, or too much. This is how we abandon ourselves, not all at once, but piece by piece. It's why so many kind, generous people feel chronically exhausted and unseen. Because their lives are built around avoiding disconnection, even if it means disconnecting from themselves. But what if rejection isn't the enemy? What if it's a compass, a mirror, a sacred boundary from the universe saying, this is not where your soul belongs? The truth is, you cannot live a life of meaning and avoid rejection. You cannot be whole and never displease anyone. Because the more you embody your truth, the more you will stir discomfort in others, especially those who benefit from your silence. But here's the shift. Every time you choose honesty over approval, your soul grows stronger. Every time you speak your truth, even with shaking hands, you reclaim the parts of you that were lost in trying to be liked. You begin to understand that rejection does not define your worth. It defines someone's capacity to meet you where you are. And sometimes that's not your fault. Sometimes it's their limit, not your inadequacy. So the question is no longer, how do I avoid rejection? It becomes, what am I willing to lose in order to keep myself? Because when you stop fearing displeasure, you start choosing truth, and that's when everything begins to shift. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, like a slow exhale after years of holding your breath. A moment when something deep inside whispers, I can't keep doing this. It doesn't always look like a crisis. Sometimes it looks like waking up and feeling numb, or sitting in a conversation and realizing you're not even present, or laughing at a joke that doesn't land because it's easier than explaining why it hurts. It's not burnout, it's soul weariness. You're tired of filtering, tired of explaining, tired of earning a seat at tables that were never meant for the real you. This is the breaking point, not of weakness but of awakening, because a soul can only beg for so long, beg for approval, beg to be seen, beg to be allowed, until it doesn't, until it rises, trembling, uncertain but undeniable, and says, no more. No more begging to be chosen. No more apologizing for existing. No more shrinking to fit into roles you never wrote. It's terrifying, this revolt of the soul, because it threatens the whole structure of your life. The relationships built on compliance, the work defined by perfectionism, the identity carved from other people's expectations. But the truth is, if you don't break the pattern will break you. There is a kind of grief that comes with this awakening. Grief for the years you spent performing. Grief for the younger self who didn't know she could say no. Grief for all the love you accepted, knowing deep down it wasn't love at all, just tolerance wrapped in politeness. But grief is not the end. Grief is the gateway. Because in this grief something sacred happens. You begin to feel your own presence again. You begin to hear your own voice, not the one rehearsed to please, but the one that trembles with truth. You begin to look in the mirror and see not a role, not a reflection, but a person, a soul, a story. Yes, it costs something to stop begging. You will lose things, approval, familiarity, certain connections. But what you gain is everything. You gain yourself. You gain nights that feel restful because you're no longer performing in your sleep. You gain mornings where you don't dread putting the mask back on. You gain relationships rooted in truth, not strategy. The soul was never meant to ask for permission. It was meant to take up space, not as an act of rebellion, but as a return to who you were before the world taught you to be small. And once you reach this moment, once the begging stops, You'll look back and wonder how you ever thought you had to earn what was always yours, the right to exist, fully, loudly, unapologetically. What does it mean to truly exist? Not just survive, not just function, but to live as yourself, unedited, undiluted, undeniable. It's not something the world often teaches us. In fact, many of us were trained to exist for others, to serve, to support, to satisfy. But existing as ourselves? That takes courage, because it's not just about being seen, it's about no longer hiding. And hiding has been our safety net. We've hidden in roles, in routines, in relationships. We've blended in, played small, softened our truth, so we wouldn't disrupt the peace. But peace that requires your silence is not peace. It's captivity. Choosing to exist is radical because it means making you the reference point. It means asking yourself not what do they want from me, but what do I want from this life? That question can feel like a thunderclap because it awakens everything you've suppressed: desires, dreams, boundaries, anger, joy. You begin to feel what your body has held for decades: tightness in your chest from not speaking up, aching shoulders from carrying other people's emotions, fatigue from performing a version of yourself that never felt quite right. And then, slowly, painfully, beautifully, you begin to say no. No to roles that drain you. No to obligations that erase you. No to the idea that you must be everything for everyone but nothing for yourself. But even more powerful than the no is the yes. You start saying yes to rest, yes to solitude, yes to creative sparks that make no sense but feel like truth, yes to the voice inside you that whispers, "This is who I am." And that yes is an act of self-love. Not the romanticized feel-good version, but the kind of love that fights for your aliveness, that builds a home inside your own skin, that stops waiting for someone else to choose you and chooses you instead. Existence is not earned. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to deserve air, space, rest, joy, or love. You were born worthy. Everything else is unlearning. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are simply waking up. And yes, it's messy. You'll second-guess yourself. You'll lose people. You'll feel lonely at first, but that loneliness is not emptiness. It's spaciousness, making room for what's real. For the first time, you're building a life that's not based on being wanted, but on being true. And that is the beginning of everything. There is a kind of freedom that cannot be bought. It doesn't come from success, approval, or status. It comes from wholeness, from the quiet, steady knowing that you are no longer fragmented. This is the path of individuation. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but becoming whole. Wholeness is not about being happy all the time. It's not about healing every wound or never feeling lost. It's about allowing every part of you, light and shadow, grace and grief, to exist without shame. It's when you no longer need to justify who you are, when you stop editing your truth for the comfort of others, when your identity no longer depends on how well you play a role. Individuation is the opposite of performance. It's presence. It's returning to the self beneath the masks. It doesn't happen in a moment. It unfolds across seasons of your life, sometimes through stillness, sometimes through rupture. You meet your shadow, the parts of you you once disowned. You sit with the fear, the anger, the grief you used to numb, and instead of running from them, you listen. Because every rejected part of you holds a piece of your freedom. To become whole, you must reclaim the very pieces you were told to hide: your sensitivity, your fire, your boundaries, your truth. And as you do, something begins to shift. You no longer chase belonging, you embody it. You realize that fitting in was never the goal, that the soul was never meant to blend in. It was meant to shine, not in a loud, performative way, but in the quiet, grounded radiance of someone who knows who they are. There's a stillness in wholeness, a strength that doesn't shout, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. You begin to see life differently, not as something to win, but as something to experience, to feel, to walk through with presence and integrity. And maybe for the first time, you can breathe deeply. You can look in the mirror and say, "I'm not perfect, but I'm real," and that is enough. This is the freedom of not asking for permission. This is the liberation that comes when you stop begging to exist and begin to choose it fully every day. The world may still misunderstand you. You may still lose things. But what you gain is your life. Your one wild, sacred life. And that is a trade worth making. So now I ask you, have you been living a life built on permission? Have you softened your truth not out of kindness but out of fear? Have you waited, quietly, patiently, for someone to tell you it's okay to be you? And what if no one ever does? What if you're the one you've been waiting for? What if the life you crave, the deep peace, the inner steadiness, the true belonging, begins not when you're finally approved, but when you finally approve of yourself? This video was not made to inspire you. It was made to awaken you, because somewhere in your story a door has been waiting to open, not outward, but inward. If this message touched something inside you, if it felt like an echo from your soul, then let this be your invitation. Stop waiting. Start being. Start walking the path of truth, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. And if this channel, this work, has helped you along the way, consider offering a super thanks as a gesture of support. It helps us continue to bring light to others who are still walking in silence. And please, subscribe. This space was made for you. There's another video appearing now, and it may hold the next piece your soul has been waiting for. Until then, may you be brave. May you be whole. May you stop asking for permission and finally choose to exist.